My lungs screamed for oxygen, closing up like a crushed paper cup, but my mother just stared at me with pure annoyance. I reached frantically for the blue inhaler on the coffee table. My fingers brushed the plastic. Then my mom snatched it away. "Carter, does your brother need this?" she asked, not even looking at me. Carter, my twin brother, didn't bother looking up from his phone. "He used it at lunch. He's fine. Just acting out because Coach Wyatt is here." Mom dropped my life-saving medicine into her purse and snapped it shut. "No attention-seeking today, Mason. We are not ruining your brother's scouting event." I fell to the carpet, my fingernails turning a sickening shade of blue. They watched me suffocate. They let my heart stop beating for 4 full minutes. They thought my silence would keep their perfect family image intact. They had no idea the absolute hellstorm of legal ruin, police investigations, and medical exposure that was about to crash down on their pathetic lives. Before I tell you about the brutal reality check that destroyed their golden world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Thank you for being here. Grab a glass of warm water, sit down, and listen as I tell you the whole story. The hardwood floor was freezing against my right cheek. I remember that specific detail with a terrifying, crystal-clear accuracy. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October, the exact day of our sweet 16th birthday, but you wouldn't know it was my birthday too by looking at the house. The entire living room was decorated in maroon and gold, the colors of the massive Division I university that was currently scouting my twin brother. A college sports scout, an imposing man named Coach Wyatt, was sitting on our expensive leather sofa, sipping iced tea and evaluating Carter for a full-ride athletic scholarship. I was nothing more than the background noise. I was an inconvenience. Every single breath I tried to pull into my lungs felt like I was trying to suck thick mud through a crushed plastic straw. The wheezing was incredibly loud in the quiet, tense living room. It was a high-pitched, rattling whistle coming from deep inside my chest. My old pediatrician used to call that specific sound my body's ultimate fire alarm. It meant my airways were completely inflamed and shutting down. "Mom!" I gasped out. The word tasted like copper and dry dust in the back of my throat. "Need hospital." My dad walked into the room from the kitchen, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He was up for a major promotion at his corporate firm that month, and he treated this scouting visit like a high-stakes board meeting. He looked down at me writhing on the rug, and his jaw tightened in deep irritation. "What in the world is going on down here?" my dad demanded, keeping his voice to a harsh whisper so the scout wouldn't hear from the patio. "The scout is getting uncomfortable. Evelyn, fix this." "He's doing it again, Robert." My mom sighed heavily. She rubbed her temples with 2 perfectly manicured fingers like I was giving her a massive migraine. "I just asked Carter. Carter says he's perfectly fine." I rolled my head back and looked up at my twin. Carter was standing by the stone fireplace. He was tall, broad-shouldered, athletic, the absolute pride and joy of our family. He looked down at me, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something dark and calculated in his eyes. It wasn't panic. It wasn't concern for his dying brother. It was pure annoyance. "He's faking," Carter announced. He spoke loudly, making absolutely sure his voice carried through the open glass doors to where Coach Wyatt was standing. "He's just mad my friends are here and he's not the center of attention today. Get up, Mason. It's pathetic and you're embarrassing yourself." At that exact moment, Julian stepped into the living room. Julian was a close family friend, 3 years older than us, who was currently studying pre-med at the state college. He had come over to drop off a birthday gift. He froze the second he saw me on the floor. "What the hell is wrong with Mason?" Julian asked, his voice cracking with instant alarm. "He looks terrible. His lips are blue." "He's being dramatic?" Carter shot back smoothly, stepping directly in front of me to block Julian's line of sight. He flashed his signature charismatic smile. "Everything is perfect, man. Don't worry about him. Let's go out to the patio and get some food." But Julian pushed past him. He dropped to his knees right beside my head and grabbed my left wrist. I saw his eyes go wide with absolute horror. His pulse is racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. He's barely getting any air into his lungs. He is cyanotic. This is a severe medical emergency. We don't do medical emergencies without Carter's permission, my dad stated firmly, crossing his arms over his chest. He said it casually, like it was the most normal, rational household rule in the world. House rules, Julian. Carter knows him best. He knows when Mason is putting on a show. What? Julian looked up at my dad like he had just grown a second head. He pulled his smartphone out of his back pocket and started frantically dialing 911. He is in respiratory failure. I'm calling an ambulance. Give me that damn phone, my dad demanded, lunging forward. He grabbed Julian's arm, twisting his wrist hard enough to make Julian drop the device onto the hardwood. The phone skittered under the sofa. You are not bringing an ambulance with blazing sirens to my house and ruining my son's evaluation. Do you have any idea how much is riding on this? My vision started to tunnel. The bright recessed lighting of the living room faded into a hazy, dark gray. The edges of the room went completely black. I looked up at Carter, my twin brother, the person who shared a womb with me. Please, I mouthed. I couldn't push enough air past my vocal cords to make a sound anymore. My chest was burning like someone had poured battery acid down my windpipe. Carter just looked down at me and shook his head slowly. He's holding his breath, Carter said. His voice cracked slightly, a tiny fraction of guilt leaking through, but he held his ground to protect his image. He's really committed to ruining my day. Just ignore him. That was the absolute last thing I heard. The intense, burning pain in my chest suddenly vanished. The sheer panic faded into a strange, heavy, floating numbness. I stopped fighting the invisible hands around my throat. I stopped moving on the floor. I stopped breathing entirely. I was gone. To truly understand how my own parents could casually stand over my dying body, arguing with a pre-med student, and wait for my arrogant teenage brother to give them permission to save my life, you have to understand the deeply twisted, toxic hierarchy of our household. It all started when we were 12 years old. We were fraternal twins, but by the time we hit middle school, we couldn't have been more different if we were born to different species. Carter hit a massive growth spurt. He was built like a varsity linebacker by 7th grade. He was loud, incredibly charismatic, wildly popular, and constantly brought home shiny gold medals from every sports tournament he entered. I was quiet, significantly smaller, and burdened with severe, chronic asthma that kept me sidelined from most physical activities. My parents didn't even try to hide their preference. Carter was their ultimate retirement plan, their walking bragging right, their golden ticket to the country club elite. I was an obligation. I was a medical bill they resented paying. They treated him like he was the sole heir to some grand family inheritance, while I was just the spare parts. The infamous permission rule was born on a freezing Tuesday in November. I had been coughing for 3 straight weeks. It was a deep, wet, agonizing cough that kept me awake all night and left my ribs bruised. My parents completely ignored it. Carter had a massive regional basketball championship tournament that weekend, and my mom was entirely consumed with organizing the team dinner, ordering custom banners, and schmoozing with the other sports parents. On the actual morning of the championship game, I woke up soaked in sweat with a fever of 103 degrees. I stumbled out of my bedroom, literally holding the hallway wall for balance, so I wouldn't collapse, and found my mom in the kitchen carefully ironing Carter's lucky jersey. "Mom, my chest really hurts," I rasped. Every word felt like swallowing glass. "I can't take a deep breath. I think I really need a doctor." Carter walked into the kitchen, wearing his athletic shorts and bouncing a basketball on the expensive tile. He looked at me, pale, sweaty, and shivering violently in my pajamas, and sneered. "He's just jealous because I'm the starting point guard today," Carter announced, tossing the basketball into his other hand. "He wants you to stay home with him at the clinic so you miss my championship game. It's so obvious." My mom stopped ironing immediately. She slowly set the iron down and looked at me, her eyes narrowing with deep suspicion and annoyance. "Is that true, Mason? Are you trying to sabotage your brother's big day?" because I will not tolerate that kind of selfishness. No, Mom, I literally can't breathe, I pleaded, coughing a wet, horrible sound. You're fine, Carter said casually, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl and taking a loud bite. He's totally faking. Let's go, Mom. We're going to be late for the warm-ups. They left. They actually left. They locked the front door, backed the SUV out of the driveway, and left a 12-year-old boy alone in a massive house with a raging, dangerous fever. I tried to walk back up the stairs to my bed, but my legs gave out. I ended up passing out on the cold tile floor of the downstairs bathroom. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, found me 4 hours later when she came over to drop off a misdelivered package and saw me lying motionless through the bathroom window. She broke a pane of glass, unlocked the door, and called 911. I was rushed to the pediatric intensive care unit with severe, advanced double pneumonia. Because the massive infection had been left completely untreated for weeks, it caused permanent, irreversible tissue scarring on my lungs. My total lung capacity was permanently damaged for the rest of my life. But instead of feeling any remorse, any guilt, or any shame for neglecting their sick child, my parents managed to twist the narrative entirely. Carter sat them down and convinced them that I had purposely let myself get that sick just to punish them for going to his basketball game. He told them I was a master manipulator, a toxic kid who used illness as a weapon to steal his spotlight. And my parents, desperately eager to clear their own guilty conscience, swallowed his vicious lie whole. From that day forward, the rule was set in stone. I was officially labeled the family hypochondriac. I was the boy who cried wolf. A few days after I was finally discharged from the hospital, my dad sat me down in the living room and delivered the verdict that would define the next 4 years of my life. Since you clearly cannot be trusted to tell the truth about your own health, my dad had said, pointing a stern finger directly at my chest. From now on, you do not get to decide when you are sick. Carter knows your tricks better than anyone. If you think you need medicine, you ask Carter. If you say you need an inhaler, you ask Carter. If he evaluates you and says you need a doctor, we will take you. If he says you are faking it for attention, the conversation is immediately over. Understood. I thought it was a temporary, insane punishment. I was dead wrong. It became the absolute, undisputed law of our family. For 4 agonizing years, my basic medical care, my right to breathe, was dictated entirely by the mood of a selfish, arrogant, narcissistic teenager. If I had a blinding migraine, I had to beg Carter to grant me permission to have ibuprofen. If he was losing a video game or just in a bad mood, the answer was a flat no. When I was 14, I broke my left wrist falling off a skateboard in the driveway. The bone was visibly protruding against the skin. I walked into the house, crying in pure agony, cradling my arm. Carter was sitting on the couch playing a multiplayer online shooter. He didn't want to pause his match. He glanced at my arm, rolled his eyes, and told my parents I had just sprained it to get out of doing my weekend chores. I sat in my bedroom for 8 straight hours, sobbing into my pillow, holding a fractured bone, until Carter finally won his tournament, got bored, and told my mom she could take me to the emergency room. The ER doctor was incredibly confused and angry about the delay, but my mom smoothly lied and said the accident had just happened. The financial and emotional disparity in our daily lives was absolutely sickening. When Carter mentioned a slight, dull ache in his left knee after practice, my dad immediately booked a $200 an hour session with a premium sports physical therapist. They dipped directly into their investment accounts to buy him top-tier athletic gear, specialized diets, and private coaching. They openly, casually talked at the dinner table about how a massive portion of his salary, and the entirety of what was supposed to be our joint college fund, was being heavily funneled exclusively into Carter's athletic career. Carter has a highly lucrative future, Mason. My mom told me bluntly one evening when I asked why I couldn't get a basic, refurbished laptop for my high school coding classes. We have to prioritize the investments that actually yield returns. Your brother is going places. You need to understand your place in this family. I understood my place perfectly. I was a terrible investment. I quickly learned to hide my physical pain. I learned to hoard my asthma medication like a survivalist. I started stashing extra rescue inhalers in the back of my school locker, burying them deep inside the lining of my mattress, hiding them in old shoeboxes. But my parents caught on. They started conducting random, humiliating room checks while I was at school. If they found my hidden medication, they immediately confiscated it, claiming I was hoarding drugs to stage a massive, fake emergency to ruin Carter's life. Which brings us back to the brutal week of our 16th birthday. The tension in our house that entire week was thick enough to choke on. Coach Wyatt, the legendary recruiter from a massive university program, had confirmed he was coming to our house for a private visit. If Carter impressed him, it meant a guaranteed, full-ride athletic scholarship. It meant my parents wouldn't have to spend another dime on his college. They were absolutely frantic. They hired professional cleaners, bought hundreds of dollars of expensive catering, and explicitly, aggressively warned me to stay out of the way. "Do not embarrass us," my dad told me, grabbing my shoulder hard. "You are to be seen and not heard." The morning of the party, I woke up feeling that terrifying, familiar tightness in my chest. The weather had shifted drastically overnight, a sharp, cold drop in temperature that almost always triggered my severe asthma. I reached for my blue rescue inhaler on my nightstand. It was gone. The spot was empty. Panicked, I tore through my desk drawers, dumped out my school backpack, ripped the blankets off my bed. Nothing. I ran downstairs, my breathing already starting to grow shallow. I found my mom in the kitchen, carefully arranging expensive cheeses on a silver platter. "Mom, where's my inhaler?" I asked, trying desperately to keep the rising terror out of my voice. She didn't even look up from the cheese. "I put it in my purse. And as soon as the caterers arrive, it's going into my locked desk drawer in the home office." "Why? Mom, you can't do that. My chest feels incredibly tight today." "Stop it right now, Mason," she snapped, slamming a silver cheese knife down onto the granite counter. "I know exactly what you are doing. You are laying the groundwork for a dramatic scene. Not today. Coach Wyatt is going to be sitting in our living room in exactly 3 hours. I asked Carter, and Carter said you were perfectly fine at breakfast. You are not ruining this opportunity for him." "Mom, I need it. What if I have a full attack?" My dad walked into the kitchen, holding a neat stack of Carter's sports highlight DVDs in custom cases. He glared at me. "If you have a real attack, Carter will evaluate you and let us know. Until then, you will sit quietly, you will smile at the guests, and you will not cause a single scene. If you ruin this promotion of your brother, you will deeply regret it. Do you understand me?" I retreated to my room, sitting on the edge of my bed, trying to do the deep, slow breathing exercises a school nurse had taught me years ago. I told myself I could make it through the afternoon. Just stay calm. Don't panic. Panic makes the airways close faster. Just breathe. But when the house filled with people around noon, the air quality plummeted. The smell of strong, expensive colognes, the heavy aroma of the catering food, the dust kicked up from dozens of shoes walking across the carpets. My chest started to violently contract. It felt like a freezing, solid iron band was tightening relentlessly around my ribcage. I stumbled out of my room and walked into the living room, desperately searching for my mom's designer purse. I needed that inhaler. That's when the severe asthma attack hit me with full, devastating force. My knees buckled under my own weight. And that's when Julian found me. And that's when my family actively chose to let me die on their expensive rug rather than cause a scene in front of a college scout. I didn't see the blinding, flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance pulling into our driveway. I didn't feel the violent, bone-rattling jolt of the defibrillator pads sending electricity through my chest. When I finally opened my eyes, everything was a harsh, blinding, sterile white. The rhythmic, high-pitched beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor echoed loudly in my ears. I tried to lift my right hand to rub my eyes, but it was incredibly heavy. A thick fur line was taped securely to the back of my hand, pumping fluids into my veins. I had a rigid plastic tube resting uncomfortably under my nose, forcing cold, dry oxygen directly into my scarred lungs. I turned my head slowly, my neck stiff and aching. A tall doctor wearing a crisp white coat was standing at the foot of my hospital bed, silently reading a thick medical chart. His silver name badge read Dr. Elijah Mercer, head of pulmonology. He heard the rustle of the sheets, looked up, and saw my eyes open. His expression was incredibly grave. It was completely devoid of the usual fake bedside cheerfulness doctors give to teenagers. He pulled up a sterile plastic chair and sat very close to my bed. "Mason." His voice was deep, steady, and incredibly serious. "You are currently in the intensive care unit at the county hospital. You suffered a catastrophic respiratory failure. Your heart stopped beating for 4 minutes. You were clinically dead, Mason. The paramedics had to shock your heart twice in your driveway before they could establish a stable rhythm. For minutes, the words hit me like a physical, heavy blow to the stomach. For minutes of absolute nothingness. For minutes where I didn't exist. "Julian," I whispered. My throat felt like it was lined with jagged sandpaper. "Did Julian? Your friend Julian is the only reason you are not in a morgue right now," Dr. Elijah confirmed, his eyes locking onto mine. "He immediately performed aggressive CPR. He kept your blood circulating just enough to prevent severe, irreversible brain damage. He saved your life. But Mason, I need you to be completely honest with me right now. Your friend Julian told the paramedics a very, very disturbing story about why the ambulance was delayed. He stated on the record that your father physically restrained him from calling 911. Before I could even process the question, the heavy wooden door to my ICU room swung violently open. My parents walked in. My mom immediately burst into loud, theatrical, echoing tears. "Oh my God, Mason, my poor, sweet baby. We were so absolutely terrified." She rushed forward, grabbing my left hand, squeezing it tight enough to grind my knuckles together. My dad stood right behind her wearing his expensive suit. His face was pale, but his jaw was set defensively, his eyes darting around the room. "You gave us a real scare there, kid," he said, shaking his head with a forced, nervous chuckle. "You really took the act way too far this time. You really had us going." I stared at them. I just stared. I had just been told by a medical professional that I was dead for 4 minutes, that my heart had literally stopped beating in my chest, and my own father was standing over my hospital bed calling it an act. "The scout left, Mason," my mom sobbed, pulling a lace tissue from her designer purse. She wasn't crying for me. She was mourning the scholarship. Coach Wyatt walked out the front door right when the paramedics ran in with the stretcher. "Carter is absolutely devastated. He hasn't left his room. His whole future is in serious jeopardy now. Why couldn't you have just waited an hour? Why did you have to do it right then?" Something deep inside my chest snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion. It was a cold, quiet, permanent fracture. The very last lingering thread of blind loyalty, of desperate childhood hope I had to these two people dissolved into absolute, icy nothingness. If I had died, they probably would have turned my funeral into a networking event. I looked away from them. I looked directly at Dr. Elijah. I didn't whisper. I drew in a painful breath of cold oxygen and spoke as clearly and loudly as my damaged throat would allow. "Dr. Mercer," I said, my voice echoing off the sterile walls. "Since I was 12 years old, my parents established a strict household rule. I am not allowed to use my rescue inhaler, take any medication, or go to a hospital unless my twin brother Carter gives them explicit permission. Yesterday morning, my mom locked my inhaler inside her purse. When I told them I couldn't breathe, my brother told them I was faking it so I wouldn't ruin his sports meeting. And my dad agreed with him. They watched me stop breathing. The silence in the ICU room was absolute and deafening. My mom dropped my hand like my skin was suddenly on fire. She took a huge step back. "Mason!" my dad barked, stepping aggressively forward, his face flushing a furious, dark red. "Shut your damn mouth. Do not tell ridiculous lies to the doctor. We are your parents. We know what is best for you. Dr. Elijah stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at my dad with a stare so intensely cold it could freeze boiling water. He reached out and pressed the red emergency button on the wall. A nurse immediately stepped into the room. "Call security," Dr. Elijah said calmly, never taking his eyes off my dad. "Escort these two individuals out of my ICU ward immediately. They are not permitted back in this room under any circumstances." "You can't do that to us," my mom shrieked, her fake tears vanishing instantly. "We have full legal custody. We are his parents. We demand to speak to the hospital administrator." "Not right now, you aren't," Dr. Elijah replied, his voice like steel. "Right now, you are a direct threat to the safety of my patient." As two large hospital security guards dragged my screaming, protesting parents out of the ward, Dr. Elijah pulled out his silver pen. "I'm calling Child Protective Services, Mason, right now. Nobody is going to silence you anymore." The next 3 days were a total blur of medical tests, breathing treatments, and formal, recorded interviews. A woman named Camila from CPS arrived. She wasn't wearing a suit. She wore a soft sweater, but her eyes were incredibly sharp. She carried a thick yellow legal pad. She took high-resolution pictures of my chest, heavily documenting the dark purple bruising on my ribs from Julian's desperate CPR. She sat with me for hours, gently but firmly asking me to detail every single aspect of the permission rule. But the real, earth-shattering bombshell dropped on day 4. Dr. Elijah came into my room just after breakfast, carrying a massive, heavy stack of manila folders. He looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he hadn't slept in days. "Mason," he said, pulling up his chair and dropping the folders onto my tray table. "I legally requested your complete, unredacted medical history from your childhood pediatric clinic. 15 years of records. I spent all of last night cross-referencing your medical emergencies with the dates and events you described to Camila." He opened the files and spread the papers out across my bed. "I found 7 specific, major incidents in the last 4 years," Dr. Elijah explained, his voice tight with heavily controlled anger. 7 distinct times you were brought to an urgent care or emergency room with a severe, advanced illness that had clearly, undeniably been ignored for days. Untreated strep throat that mutated into a dangerous kidney infection. A fractured wrist left untreated for 8 hours. A severe allergic reaction to a bee sting left until your airway began to significantly swell. He pointed to a column of dates he had written down on a separate sheet of paper. "I had Camila officially pull up your family's public social media history and Carter's high school athletic records," he continued, tapping the paper. "Look at this. Every single one of these 7 major medical emergencies coincides exactly with a major event for your brother. The regional basketball finals, his junior prom, his state debate tournament, the elite sports banquet." I stared at the dates. It was right there in black ink on white paper. The undeniable, systematic pattern of my abuse. "This isn't just a case of poor parenting or medical neglect, Mason," Dr. Elijah said softly, looking me right in the eye. "This is felony child endangerment. They deliberately, systematically withheld life-saving care to prioritize a teenager's sporting event. They gambled with your life to protect his schedule, and this time you lost. You died on that floor." The door opened, and Camila walked in. She looked at me, her face completely serious and totally professional. "Mason, I just got off the phone with a family court judge," Camila announced. "I am officially implementing an emergency safety placement order. You are not going back to that house. When Dr. Mercer discharges you tomorrow morning, you are going to live with Julian's family, the Hayes. They have already cleared the background checks and agreed to take you in." A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. I wasn't going back to the nightmare. I was free. The next morning, Mr. Hayes, Julian's dad, pulled his large SUV right up to the hospital entrance. Camila rode in the back seat with us. We drove directly to my parents' house to collect my clothes and school supplies. We didn't go alone. We had a police escort, Two fully uniformed county officers stood on the front porch, hands resting near their duty belts. As I unlocked the front door, my parents were standing rigidly in the grand foyer. They looked absolutely furious, but underneath the anger, I could see a deep, frantic undercurrent of panic in their eyes. They were losing control of the narrative. "This is completely ridiculous," my dad spat, glaring with absolute hatred at the police officers. "You are tearing a loving family apart over a massive misunderstanding. He's a rebellious teenager throwing a tantrum for attention." I didn't even look at him. I walked straight past them, up the grand staircase to my room, grabbed my 2 large duffel bags, and started rapidly throwing my clothes, my textbooks, and my school laptop inside. Carter was standing in the upstairs hallway, leaning casually against his bedroom doorframe. He was wearing his expensive varsity jacket. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You really did it, huh?" Carter sneered, crossing his massive arms. "You ruined my entire life. Coach Wyatt won't even return my calls or emails now. He pulled the scholarship offer this morning. Everyone at school is talking about the ambulance and the cops. Are you happy now, you pathetic, weak loser?" I stopped packing. I zipped up my heavy duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked right up to my twin brother. For the very first time in my entire life, I didn't feel small looking at him. I didn't feel intimidated. I just saw a sad, narcissistic coward. "I died, Carter," I said. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of any emotion. "I stopped breathing and my heart stopped beating because of you. So no, I'm not happy. But I am absolutely done protecting you." I turned and walked downstairs. As I passed my parents in the foyer, my mom desperately reached out to grab my arm. "Mason, please, stop this. Think about what the neighbors will say. Think about our reputation at the firm. Don't touch me," I warned, stepping back so quickly she stumbled. I walked out the front door, got into the back seat of Mr. Hayes' car, and didn't look back once as we drove away from that house forever. Later that night, sitting in the quiet, perfectly safe guest bedroom of the Hayes house, Julian knocked gently on my door. He came in holding a small, silver thumb drive. "My friend Dylan was at the party," Julian said quietly, handing me the drive. He sat on the edge of the bed. "He was recording a video on his phone for Carter Sports highlight reel right when you collapsed. He caught the whole thing, Mason. The camera was rolling the entire time. He caught your dad physically grabbing my arm when I tried to call 911. He caught Carter loudly saying you were faking while your lips were turning blue on the rug." Julian looked at me, his eyes full of deep sorrow and fierce loyalty. Dylan didn't want to get involved with the police, but he couldn't sleep. He felt incredibly guilty. He drove over and gave this to me today. I already emailed a high-definition copy to Camila and the lead police investigator. The storm hadn't just begun. It was about to become a Category 5 legal hurricane. Waking up at the Hayes house the next morning felt like waking up on an entirely different planet. The silence was jarring. There was no screaming from downstairs. There was no frantic tiptoeing around Carter's rigorous morning training schedule. Mrs. Hayes was making pancakes in the kitchen, and Mr. Hayes was reading the newspaper, simply asking me how I slept and if the bed was comfortable. Nobody demanded I prove I was worthy of taking up space in the room. Nobody checked to see if I was faking a cough. It was the very first time I realized how deeply, terrifyingly abnormal my own family was. But my parents were corporate fighters. They weren't going to let their control over me slip away without a vicious, dirty fight. Exactly 1 week after I moved into the guest room, I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my AP history homework when Camila from CPS knocked heavily on the front door. When Mrs. Hayes let her in, Camila didn't have her usual reassuring, gentle smile. She looked incredibly stressed, holding a thick new file. "Mason, sit down," she said, pulling out a chair across from me. "Your parents filed an official emergency grievance with the state CPS board this morning. They are formally claiming that the Hayes family is emotionally manipulating you, brainwashing you, and holding you hostage against your will. They are demanding that your emergency placement be immediately revoked and that full custody be returned to them today. My stomach plummeted straight to the floor. A cold, clammy sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My hands started to shake. No, you can't send me back there. Camila, they'll kill me. If I go back, they will let me die next time. Take a deep breath, Mason. Look at me, Camila said firmly, reaching across the table and putting her hand over mine to stop the shaking. I am not sending you anywhere. You are safe here. But this means they are going to play incredibly dirty. They hired a high-powered, incredibly expensive defense attorney from the city. They are aggressively trying to spin this entire event as severe teenage rebellion and malicious interference by Julian's family. Mrs. Hayes, who was standing by the kitchen sink washing dishes, dried her hands violently on a towel. She looked absolutely furious. What do? We are not letting that boy go back to that house of horrors. We will go to the press if we have to. You fight back legally, a sharp, confident voice said from the hallway doorway. We all turned. Standing there in a crisp, tailored navy pantsuit was Sarah, Julian's aunt. She happened to be a ruthless, highly successful civil litigation lawyer who specialized in family law. Julian had called her the absolute second he heard about the CPS report from Camila. Sarah walked into the kitchen, dropped her heavy leather briefcase onto the table with a thud, and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. I read the entire case file Julian sent me. I watched the video Dylan took. Twice, Sarah said, looking directly into my eyes. She didn't treat me like a fragile kid. She treated me like a client. Your parents are banking on the fact that you are a scared, traumatized kid who will fold under legal pressure. They think they can bully the foster system. They are wrong. We are going to hit them so incredibly hard legally that their heads will spin. Sarah quickly outlined our brutal counterstrategy. She was filing for an immediate, permanent restraining order against my parents and Carter. She was going to family court to permanently strip them of all medical and legal custody over me until I turned 18. If they want to play the manipulation card in front of a judge, Sarah said, tapping her expensive pen on the table, I am going to formally subpoena the last 10 years of their banking and financial records. I want to see exactly how much of the family income, specifically what was designated as your joint college fund, was funneled exclusively into Carter's private accounts while you were routinely denied basic, cheap medical care. We will expose the systematic financial abuse right alongside the severe medical neglect. Let's see how their high-priced lawyer spins that. Hearing her say it out loud with such absolute, unwavering confidence made it real. I wasn't crazy. I was a victim of sustained abuse, and I finally had a legal shark in my corner ready to draw blood. The next day, I had to return to school. The rumors had already spread through the hallways like a massive wildfire. Everyone in the junior class knew an ambulance had come to Carter's birthday party. Everyone knew I hadn't been home in a week. And everyone knew Carter's prestigious scholarship offer had magically vanished. Walking down the main hallway felt like walking through an absolute gauntlet. People stopped to stare. Whispers followed me like a shadow. I ignored them and went straight to the school counselor's office. Olivia, the senior counselor, had already been extensively briefed by Camila and Sarah. She had a thick, red file sitting on her desk with my name printed boldly on the tab. Mason, come in, sit down, Olivia said warmly, closing the door behind me. We need to build your ironclad safety net here at school. We spent 2 hours creating a bulletproof medical autonomy plan. Olivia typed out an official, legally binding document stating that I, and only I, had the absolute right to determine if I needed to use my rescue inhaler or require emergency medical attention. No teacher was allowed to question my judgment. No staff member was allowed to call my parents or ask my brother for verification under any circumstances. If I needed to leave a classroom because I felt tight in my chest, I didn't have to raise my hand or ask permission. I could just stand up and walk out. I am putting this legal document on file with the principal, the school nurse, and I am personally handing a copy to every single one of your teachers, Olivia said, printing the pages and handing me a copy. You have your own medical rights now, Mason. "Nobody can take your breath away from you here," felt incredibly empowering. For the first time in my entire life, I held a physical piece of paper that explicitly said my body belonged to me. But Carter wasn't handling the massive fallout well at all. His perfect, golden life was rapidly unraveling at the seams. The damning video Dylan took had quietly leaked to a few key players on the varsity basketball team. Suddenly, the golden boy wasn't so shiny anymore. People realized he had watched his brother die for a scouting event. His friends were openly distancing themselves. He was eating lunch alone. I was standing at my locker on Thursday afternoon, quietly organizing my chemistry textbooks, when the metal locker door right next to mine slammed shut with a violent, echoing bang. I jumped. Carter was standing right next to me, breathing heavily. His face was a dark, blotchy red, and the thick veins were bulging visibly in his neck. He looked completely unhinged, like a cornered animal. "You think you're so damn smart, don't you?" Carter hissed, stepping aggressively into my personal space. He smelled like cheap body spray and stale, nervous sweat. "You think you can just destroy my entire life, steal my college fund, and walk away clean? Leave me alone, Carter," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I casually slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. I discreetly felt for the side button on my phone and hit the record button. Sarah had explicitly told me to record absolutely any interaction with my family from now on. "You're going to fix this right now?" Carter demanded, stepping closer and jabbing a hard, painful finger directly into my chest. "You are going to go to the police station tomorrow morning, and you are going to tell them you made it all up. You're going to tell them you had a minor panic attack and wildly exaggerated everything because you were jealous. If you don't fix my life, I swear to God, Mason, I will make the rest of yours a living hell." I looked at him. I really, truly looked at him. This was the boy who had held my fragile life in his selfish hands for 4 brutal years. This was the boy who smirked while I choked on my own lack of air on the living room rug. He wasn't a god. He was just a bully losing his power. "You already made my life hell, Carter," I said coldly, staring right into his eyes. "And I'm not fixing anything. You did this entirely to yourself." Carter's eyes went pitch black with rage. He grabbed the front collar of my shirt with both hands, pulling me forward so violently my neck snapped back. "You worthless little—" "Hey!" a deep voice yelled from down the hall. It was Mr. Harrison, the huge AP Physics teacher. "Back away right now, Carter. Let him go." Carter immediately dropped my shirt, stepping back, but he kept glaring at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "This isn't over," he whispered menacingly, before turning and storming rapidly down the crowded hallway. I stood there by my locker, my heart pounding violently against my ribs, but I didn't reach for my inhaler. I was breathing just fine. My chest was clear. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket, stopped the audio recording, and carefully saved the file to the cloud. The locker room confrontation was just the beginning of Carter's rapid downward spiral. By Friday afternoon, the whispers in the school hallways had turned into loud, unavoidable conversations. But the final nail in their coffin didn't come from a lawyer or a police officer. It came directly from the golden boy himself. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was sitting at the Hayes kitchen table, finishing up a history essay, when my phone buzzed against the wood. It was 11:45 p.m. The screen lit up with a number I hadn't blocked yet. It was Carter. I didn't answer it. I just watched the screen glow until it went dark, signaling he had left a voicemail. I almost deleted it. A huge part of me just wanted to erase his voice from my life completely. But Sarah's strict instructions echoed in my head. Document absolutely everything. I picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and pressed play. The audio was messy at first. There was loud background noise, maybe wind or a passing car, and the unmistakable sound of heavy, ragged breathing. Then Carter spoke. His voice was slurred, thick with panic and what sounded like cheap alcohol. He was completely unraveled. "Mason," Carter's voice cracked through the speaker. "Mason, you have to stop this. You have to tell them it was a mistake. Dad is screaming at Mom. They're talking about taking out a second mortgage to pay the lawyer. Everything is ruined. My life is completely over because of you. He paused, and I could hear him quietly sobbing. It was a pathetic, wet sound. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, Carter choked out, his words stumbling over each other. I know I messed up. Okay, I admit it. I saw your lips turning blue on the rug. I saw you gasping. I knew you weren't faking it this time. I knew you were actually dying. But Coach Wyatt was standing right there on the patio. He was looking right at me. If I let Julian call the ambulance, the sirens would have ruined the entire afternoon. Coach hates drama. He told me he recruits leaders, not kids with baggage. I just needed you to hold on for 10 more minutes so he could leave. Just 10 minutes. I didn't want you to die, Mason. I just needed my scholarship. You owe me. You have to fix this. The voicemail clicked and ended. I sat frozen in the kitchen chair. The silence in the house was heavy. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. He knew. He looked at my suffocating, dying body, weighed my actual life against a college basketball scholarship, and chose the basketball. He actively, consciously chose to let me stop breathing. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over my entire brain. I immediately saved the audio file to 3 different cloud drives. Then, I forwarded it directly to Sarah, my lawyer, and Nolan Graves, the fiercely intimidating county prosecutor who was handling the criminal charges against my parents. Nolan called me less than 10 minutes later. Mason, Nolan said, his voice completely devoid of its usual exhaustion. He sounded wide awake and highly focused. Did you just send me what I think you sent me? Yes, sir, I replied, staring blankly at the kitchen wall. That is my twin brother. This changes absolutely everything, Nolan stated, the rustle of papers echoing through the phone. Proving criminal intent in child endangerment cases is incredibly difficult. Parents always hide behind the excuse of ignorance or poor judgment. They claim they simply didn't know the medical situation was dire. This audio file utterly destroys that defense. It proves your brother, who was appointed as your medical proxy by your parents, knew the situation was lethal and deliberately lied to protect a sports evaluation. I am taking this to the judge first thing tomorrow morning. 2 weeks later, we all walked into the county courthouse. The air was thick and suffocating, smelling of old wood polish and nervous sweat. I sat at the prosecution table next to Nolan Graves and Sarah. My parents and Carter sat at the defense table across the aisle. They looked terrible. The stress had aged my mom 10 years. Her usually perfect hair was tied back tightly, and her face was drawn. My dad sat rigidly, his expensive suit looking slightly too big for him now. Carter sat between them, staring at his shoes, looking like a deflated balloon. The courtroom was packed. Julian was there, sitting right behind me. Dr. Elijah Mercer was there in his white coat, ready to testify as an expert medical witness. Camila from CPS sat diligently with her thick yellow notepad. The judge, a stern-looking woman with gray hair tightly coiled at the nape of her neck, banged her gavel and called the room to order. My parents' high-priced defense attorney stood up first. He was a slick man who spoke with too much artificial confidence. He immediately launched into a passionate, rehearsed speech about how this was all a tragic, horrible family misunderstanding. He argued that my parents were loving, dedicated citizens who simply made a minor error in medical judgment during a stressful, chaotic social gathering. He actually tried to suggest that my severe asthma was difficult to diagnose without medical training, and therefore they couldn't be held criminally liable for waiting to call an ambulance. Your Honor, the defense lawyer concluded, adjusting his tie. Robert and Evelyn are good people. They simply trusted their other son's assessment. There was no malice here, just a terribly unfortunate delay. The judge looked completely unimpressed. She turned her gaze to Nolan Graves. The prosecution may proceed. Nolan stood up slowly. He didn't carry any papers. He just walked over to the audiovisual desk at the center of the room. He plugged his laptop into the court's massive speaker system. Your Honor, Nolan said, his voice ringing loud and clear across the silent room. The defense claims there was no malice. They claim ignorance. They claim this was a simple, tragic misunderstanding. Let's hear directly from the medical proxy they explicitly appointed to manage their son's life. Nolan pressed play. Carter's slurred, panicked voice filled the courtroom. Every single word was crystal clear through the expensive speakers. I saw your lips turning blue on the rug. I saw you gasping. I knew you weren't faking it this time. I knew you were actually dying. But Coach Wyatt was standing right there. I just needed my scholarship. The reaction in the room was immediate and explosive. My mom gasped so loudly it echoed off the high ceiling. She slapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes widening in absolute, genuine horror as she turned to look at Carter. My dad went completely pale. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. He stared at his golden boy, his perfect investment, as if a monster had just taken off its human mask. They had honestly believed Carter's lie. They had believed I was faking it. They were horrible, neglectful parents who instituted a toxic rule. But in that exact moment, they realized their favorite son had manipulated them into becoming accomplices to my near murder just so he could play college sports. The defense lawyer practically collapsed into his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. He knew his entire case had just been utterly incinerated. The judge leaned far forward over her heavy wooden bench, her eyes locked onto my parents and Carter. The sheer disgust on her face was palpable. In my 20 years on this bench, the judge said, her voice dripping with absolute venom, I have rarely seen a more chilling display of calculated selfishness and grotesque parental negligence. You delegated the medical care of a severely chronically ill child to a teenager who just admitted on tape that he would rather watch his brother choke to death than lose a basketball scholarship. This is completely abhorrent. Nolan called me to the stand. It was time for my victim impact statement. I stood up, my legs feeling like heavy lead, and walked to the wooden podium. I looked directly at my parents. They couldn't even meet my eyes. My mom was quietly sobbing into her hands. Carter was staring blankly at the wood paneling of the defense table. For 4 years, I started, my voice remarkably steady. I had to ask permission to breathe. I was denied basic, fundamental medical care because I was considered an inconvenience to my brother's athletic career. When I lay dying on our living room floor, my father physically assaulted the only person trying to save my life. My family chose their public image over my heartbeat. I gripped the sides of the podium tightly. I am not asking for revenge. I am asking for freedom. I am asking the court to ensure that these people never have the power to make a single decision about my life, my body, or my medical care ever again. The judge didn't hesitate. She slammed her gavel down. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The legal fallout was swift and utterly devastating for my family. Faced with the undeniable audio evidence and the horrifying medical records Dr. Elijah provided, the expensive defense lawyer highly advised my parents to take a massive plea deal to avoid actual prison time. They officially pled guilty to felony child endangerment and criminal medical neglect. The judge showed zero mercy in her sentencing. They were placed on 5 years of strict, heavily monitored probation. They were ordered to complete hundreds of hours of intense community service. But the real punishment was the permanent destruction of their perfect, highly curated lives. Because they now carried felony records, my dad's corporate firm immediately fired him. The promotion he cared so deeply about was gone in a single afternoon. He lost his massive salary, his company car, and his prestigious country club membership. My mom was politely asked to step down from the board of every single charity and social committee she had spent a decade climbing. They became social pariahs in our wealthy neighborhood. Carter's downfall was even more spectacular. The school board, armed with the police report and the judge's scathing comments, officially expelled him for his violent behavior in the hallways and his admitted role in a life-threatening incident. Without a high school to play for, and with the scandal attached to his name, every single college recruiter deleted his number. His athletic career was completely dead before it even started. His former friends treated him like he carried a plague. The golden boy had lost his shine entirely. The judge also signed a permanent, ironclad protective order. My parents and Carter were legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, Julian, or the Hayes family. Sarah successfully petitioned the court to officially emancipate me for medical purposes, granting me absolute legal control over my own health care. When it was all over, when the court documents were signed and the ink was dry, I walked out of the courthouse and took a deep breath of the cool city air. I didn't feel a sudden, euphoric rush of happiness. I didn't feel like jumping up and down. I mostly felt empty. It was a strange, echoing void where the constant fear and anxiety used to live. But Mrs. Hayes knew exactly what I needed. The very next Saturday morning, she knocked on my bedroom door. "Get dressed, Mason," she said, jingling her car keys. "We are going shopping. We have some incredibly important things to buy." We drove to a massive medical supply store on the other side of town. It wasn't a fun, glamorous trip, but it was the most important shopping trip of my entire life. Under the strict guidance of Dr. Elijah, we bought everything. We bought an expensive, top-of-the-line nebulizer machine. I sat on the edge of my bed and just stared at that little fridge for an hour. It belonged to me. The medication inside it belonged to me. I didn't have to beg anyone for it. I didn't have to wait for Carter to finish a video game. I didn't have to worry about my mom locking it inside her designer purse. My breath was finally my own property. Over the next 6 months, the physical change in my body was miraculous. Because I was finally taking my daily maintenance medications consistently, without interruption or fear of confiscation, my lungs began to heal. The chronic inflammation significantly reduced. At my next checkup, Dr. Elijah looked at my breathing charts and smiled widely. "Mason, your lung capacity has jumped from a terrifying 60% up to nearly 90%. You are thriving, son. You are actually thriving." I finished high school living comfortably with the Hayes family. They treated me like a second son, attending my academic decathlon events and cheering loudly when I walked across the stage to get my diploma. When it came time for college, Sarah helped me secure a massive state grant for victims of abuse, completely covering my tuition since my parents had drained whatever college fund I was supposed to have. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be an athlete. I wanted to help people breathe. 9 years is a long time. It's enough time for scars to fade from dark purple to a dull, barely noticeable silver. It's enough time to rebuild a completely shattered life from the ground up. I was 25 years old. I lived in a bright, modern apartment overlooking the city skyline. I had a solid salary, a good group of friends, and a career I was deeply passionate about. I was a fully licensed respiratory therapist working at one of the top trauma hospitals in the state. Every single day, I walked into emergency rooms and intensive care units to help people who were suffocating. I managed ventilators, administered life-saving breathing treatments, and sat with terrified patients who felt like their lungs were failing them. I understood their absolute primal panic better than any textbook could ever teach. I was good at my job because I had been the kid turning blue on the floor. I hadn't spoken a single word to my parents or my twin brother in nearly a decade. The protective order had long since expired, but the absolute silence remained. From what Julian had heard through the grapevine, their lives were bleak. My parents eventually had a vicious, messy divorce, blaming each other entirely for the loss of their wealth and social standing. Carter was supposedly working a dead-end retail job 2 states away, still telling anyone who would listen that an injury ruined his professional sports career. I didn't care. They were ghosts to me. But ghosts have a funny way of trying to haunt you when you least expect it. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital. I was standing in the busy main lobby, zipping up my jacket and holding a terrible cup of cafeteria coffee, when I heard someone say my name. Mason? Oh my goodness, Mason. Is that really you? I turned around. Standing near the automatic sliding doors was an older woman wearing an expensive wool coat. It took my tired brain a few seconds to place her face. It was Aunt Margaret, my dad's older sister. I hadn't seen her since I was 10 years old. Aunt Margaret, I said politely, keeping a safe physical distance. What are you doing here? She rushed forward, her eyes brimming with what looked like highly practiced tears. She reached out as if to hug me, but I took a deliberate step back. She dropped her arms awkwardly. I was just visiting a friend in the cardiology wing, Margaret said, pressing a hand to her chest. Look at you. You look so handsome, so professional in your scrubs. Your father told me you went into the medical field. I don't speak to Robert, I said flatly, refusing to call him Dad. How does he know what I do? Oh, Mason, he keeps tabs on you, she sighed, putting on a deeply tragic, sympathetic face. He really does. He misses you terribly. They both do. You know, your parents' divorce was incredibly hard on everyone. The legal fees absolutely bankrupted them. Your mother is living in a tiny, awful apartment, and your father is struggling with his health. I took a slow sip of my terrible coffee. That sounds like a personal problem, Margaret. I have to go home. Please, Mason, just wait a minute, she pleaded, stepping into my path to block the exit. Family is family. You have to understand they were under so much pressure back then. Carter was their ticket to a good retirement. They made a terrible mistake, but you survived. You're clearly doing wonderfully now. Don't you think it's time to let the anger go? Don't you think it's time to help your family? Help them. I laughed a dry, humorless laugh. You want me to help them financially? Just a little, Margaret said smoothly, dropping the emotional act and getting straight to the point. Carter can barely make his rent. Your father has mounting medical bills. You have a great salary here at the hospital. It's only right. You know, after everything happened, they were so devastated when they realized the inheritance plan didn't work out. I stopped walking. I frowned, staring at her perfectly made-up face. What inheritance plan? Margaret blinked, realizing she had stepped slightly off her carefully prepared script. Oh, you know, the money. Margaret, what inheritance plan are you talking about? I demanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. She nervously adjusted her silk scarf, looking around the crowded lobby. Well, when your grandfather passed away, he left a very large sum of money to be split equally between you and Carter for your college funds and future. A massive inheritance. I felt my heart skip a beat. I never knew about a grandfather's inheritance. And, Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. When you two were 10 years old, long before you got really sick, your parents went to a lawyer. They legally petitioned to have your half of the inheritance completely transferred into Carter's sole trust fund. They argued that Carter's athletic coaching required the full amount. They completely wrote you out of the money, Mason. They bet everything on the golden boy. The lobby around me seemed to fade into white noise. 10 years old. Before the severe pneumonia. Before the permission rule. Before the incident at the party. For years, I had tried to rationalize their behavior in my head. I told myself that maybe the stress of Carter's sports career had temporarily blinded them. I told myself that maybe the rule started as a misguided attempt to manage my health and spiraled out of control. But Margaret had just handed me the final, ugly puzzle piece. They hadn't neglected me because I was a difficult teenager. They hadn't let me stop breathing just because of a scouting event. They had financially and emotionally abandoned me when I was a 10-year-old child. They had looked at two 10-year-old boys, decided one was a lucrative asset and the other was a useless burden, and legally stripped me of my future before I even hit puberty. They never loved me, not even a little bit. Margaret looked at me expectantly. So you see, Mason, they lost all that money trying to defend themselves in court. The trust fund is gone. It's only fair that you chip in now to help them survive. I looked at this woman, this enabler of abuse, and I didn't feel a single ounce of anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt an absolute, liberating sense of complete closure. The last invisible chain connecting me to that toxic bloodline snapped in half. I smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed smile. "Margaret," I said softly, looking right into her eyes, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to walk out those doors, and I am going to go to my beautiful apartment. I am going to eat a great dinner, and I am going to sleep wonderfully. I don't care if Robert is sick. I don't care if Evelyn lives in a box. I don't care if Carter starves. You can tell them exactly what I said. If any of you ever approach me again, I will call the police and file a harassment charge so fast your head will spin." Her jaw dropped open in shock. "You are an incredibly selfish young man." "No," I replied, turning my back on her. "I'm just breathing on my own." I walked out the automatic doors and didn't look back. Sometimes, after a particularly hard shift at the hospital, when the smell of antiseptic and fear clings to my scrubs, I take the elevator all the way up to the roof. The hospital roof is quiet. It overlooks the entire city, a massive sea of twinkling yellow and white lights stretching out to the dark horizon. The wind-up there is always sharp and cold. I stood by the heavy concrete ledge, leaning my elbows against the rough surface. I closed my eyes and took a deep, deliberate breath. The cold air rushed down my throat, expanding my lungs fully, easily, without a single whistle or wheeze. My chest rose and fell in a perfect, steady rhythm. I thought about the 4 minutes I spent in the dark when I was 16. I thought about the sheer terror of not being able to pull air into my body, of watching my own family stare at me with cold indifference. But then I thought about Mrs. Hayes making me pancakes. I thought about Julian dropping to his knees to perform CPR, fighting my own father to save my life. I thought about Sarah tearing my parents apart in a courtroom to protect me. I thought about Dr. Elijah piecing together 15 years of medical records because he actually cared if a teenager lived or died. Blood doesn't make a family. Genetics don't guarantee love. Family isn't the people who demand you ask permission to exist in their space. Family isn't the people who weigh your worth against a college scholarship or a corporate promotion. Family are the people who stand in front of the storm for you. They are the people who buy you a mini fridge so you never have to be scared of suffocating again. They are the people who ensure your lungs are full, your heart is beating, and your voice is heard. I opened my eyes, looking out at the city lights. I survived the absolute worst they could do to me. They tried to take my breath away, but all they did was teach me exactly how valuable it was. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy, and I know it was dark at times, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. If you are out there right now, living in a house where you feel invisible, where you are made to feel like a burden, please know that you are not crazy. You are not broken. You just haven't found your real family yet. Keep fighting, keep breathing, and get out the moment you can. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save your own life? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one. And finally, for my special viewers, I have a secret code. If you are hearing my voice right now, that means you are part of the 1% Club, the incredibly rare, amazing group of people who watch videos all the way to the very end. Please comment the letter W below. It stands for winner. When I see that W, I'll know you survived the whole journey with me, and it shows me who my true supporters are. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and follow the channel so we can continue to share these journeys together. Stay strong, keep breathing, and I will see you in the next story.